Hi everyone, and welcome again to another video clip. Now, in the last video clip, we spoke a lot about this idea of motivation, and it's something I'd like to continue exploring with you because I think it's very important. The reason why it's very important is because this is the middle of winter and we're all faced with darkness. And at this time of Christmas, which is when I'm currently recording this, there is something more to be said, about this idea of light in the darkness. And I'm not just saying that in a religious way, I'm using it as a metaphor for you to try to capture that energy which motivates us. Now, the last time we spoke, I was telling you that we don't really want to use this word motivation. And the reason why we don't want to use it is because it's one of these psychological terms that creates an illusion that's not really there. It's not really about having something which comes and goes. Motivation is defined as something which we either have or don't have at certain times of the day or certain times of the night. But let's just imagine for a moment that that word didn't actually exist. Okay? Does it change anything? Well, yeah. First of all, it makes that energy that we're referring to more available. It's not something that you can simply lose. So that's the first thing, to redefine motivation. How do we redefine that? Well, there's many different names that we could use. One of them is desire. One of them is that inner drive that we have. Encouragement probably isn't a good word to use because encouragement kind of gives us this idea that it's from somebody else. Impulse might be a good one, or incentive. So you see, when we change motivation away from lack, something that can come and go, we find a little bit, at least, that it's something that's here now. So if you're learning and you have your books in front of you and you're thinking, oh, you know what, I'm just not motivated, rather than use that word, maybe it would be worth exploring why you don't feel you have the energy. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be either you're hungry, you're angry, you're lonely, or tired. Those are the main ones, the main reasons. And so it's not like something's came along and robbed you. It's simply uncovering what the truth is. And that isn't like your energy has gone. It's just maybe there's something else there. Now, in our last video clip, one of the things that I was really telling you to do is to try to do some meditation. And the reason why I was suggesting that is because it's a bit different. Right now, when you're learning, you're probably looking around you to say, okay, where do I get the perfect tense? Where do I get the present perfect? Where do I get the past tense? Where do I get more vocabulary? Where do I find a good teacher? Where do I find this? Where do I find that? And then, of course, you go to a book because it may have what you're looking for. But I want you to stop for a minute from doing that, really to stop just searching everywhere for what you want, because what you're seeking isn't out there, it's in here. All right. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to learn, but by looking inside yourself, you can easily see and use what you've already picked up. Let me give you an example. So imagine that you last week learned 10 words, okay? And you're here this week looking to learn 10 more. What about the ones from last week? You've written your examples. Do you still remember them? Probably not. most of us have a very low attention span, and even when we do remember them, it's usually quite difficult and torturous to keep them inside our minds. We go through this repetition, a bit like a bird, like a parrot. We try to remember everything, and then we torture ourselves when we forget one of them. The reason why we do that is because this is how we're taught at school. We're told, okay, to learn, you have to suffer. You have to be in pain. You should be facing the front, listening to the teacher. That is actually quite good from a discipline point of view because it helps you to keep concentration, maybe. But in terms of learning, those days have gone. This idea that you need to somehow be in pain to learn, it's no longer the case because learning can be from anywhere. It can be from any source. It can even be from your mobile phone. It is no longer with a teacher and a book. But yet we still come back to that way because firstly, it's the only way we know. Secondly, it's familiar to us because that's how we learned in the past. And thirdly, because we need some guides. We need something to show us or to guide us or to help us. That's all fine. But in reality, we're really just wasting our time. You know, when you reduce a language down to a commodity, everything is reduced. You're reduced because you're no longer a living entity, you're just a factor in a transaction. The book is reduced because you'll only get as much English out of it as you've paid for it. And the whole system of learning is reduced in exchange for the money. We do it because it has nothing to do with the book itself. It's because the act of buying opens something up in your mind and it says, okay, I'm ready to learn. That's all that happens. And because you're investing money in it, you're giving a message to your mind saying, okay, I'm opening myself up to the universe. Let's see what comes in. You could easily do that without the transaction of buying a book, but it's more sustainable and understandable when you actually do something positive, you know, because it marks the beginning of a new chapter for you. Now, I'm not saying that you should throw away the books, move to a mountain and sit there for 3 months. But what I am saying is that when it comes to learning, you have to be more introspective. Right now, we're living in a world where everything is pushed out. Okay, I want this, I want that, I want that cake, I want this, I want that. And the reason why we're doing that is because we're really not comfortable by looking inside, looking at what we want, who we are, what's happening with us and our relationships. Everything is somebody else's fault, somebody else's problem, and therefore you have some money, you throw it at a teacher and you say, okay, now you give me English. That's never going to be the starting point for your learning. Life isn't like that. And I'm just remembering someone I was talking to recently. They spent many years training to be a doctor, and then they spent more years training in their speciality. And then after COVID, what happened? Their job is the same as any other call center. They talk to people every day about health, people that they can't even see, and people that supposedly trust them. And there's many other examples like that. I once knew a doctor who went to medical school, learned everything about the human body, learned everything he needed to know. And then towards the end of his life, they brought in computers, and essentially it did the thinking for him. He no longer needed the skill. In fact, he wasn't allowed to use his skill. He had to refer to the computer. A computer says no. Computer says yes, even though he had all of that knowledge. And this brings us again, I'm just being diverted for a moment, but this brings us again back to this idea of principled living that I mentioned in my last podcast. And that is that in the old days, people did things because they believed they worked. They could demonstrate them to you. Look, this works, do this, you get well. This works, do this, and you learn. But these days, again, people don't do that. The answer has to come from somewhere else. The internet, Google, the grammar book in the case of learning a language. But getting back to my point is this. When you spend half an hour reading, let's say an English book, and I don't mean a grammar book, okay? It would be much better for you to spend half an hour in silence, bringing to mind what you've just read. Now, that's not easy. It's not easy for any of us to have the time to do that, to get into the mood of doing that. And if I can just use a metaphor to explain what I mean, and I've said this many times in my podcasts, when you go on holiday, you get up in the morning and you look around. What happens is you make plans for your day, but you're relaxed enough to decide at the last moment what you want to do. You might go to a museum, you may or may not have breakfast, but you can make that decision. Most of us, however, what's happening is we daily are stuck in a routine that we can't get out of. And then we try to fit learning into that routine between two meetings, between two places, and it doesn't work because, of course, you have a lot on your mind, you have a lot of stress in your body, and it doesn't go anywhere. So in that hour, unless the teacher finds a way to really connect with you and be empathic with you, you're not going to remember a word that he said, especially if the teacher is sitting there with a grammar book trying to explain the present perfect. You're not going to have the knowledge or the concentration to keep that in your mind. So why would you spend the money? However, if the teacher is able to ask you a few questions and really get inside your head to find out what's happening in there, then there's a chance that you'll remember it as a positive experience, and therefore, as a result, are likely to remember more words and phrases that came from it. Again, if you're on holiday and you have that holiday spirit, there'll be much more chance that you're going to be able to remember things that happen during that time. You need to get into that kind of holiday spirit again before you start learning. Trying to fit an English lesson in while you're working, while you're walking the dog, because you have to, while you're sitting with the family, it's not enough. I mean, I've had some people who've tried to take lessons with me and they've been driving a car, and not only is that dangerous and irresponsible, the excuse, oh, but it's the only time I have, it doesn't really work. There's a possibility that is the only time that you have, if you're driving the car. But it's not sensible to be like that, and it kind of is a little bit disrespectful as well. If you really want to learn, you need to get into that holiday mode. You need to have a lot of space before the lesson, a lot of space after the lesson. Now, I'm saying this to encourage you to learn. I'm not saying it because I want you to give up your job and move to the mountains. I'm just telling you that the most successful people are ones who are able to have enough time and space to reflect on what's happening in their body and what's good for them. As a result, what happens is, let's say you want to remember your English from yesterday. You simply meditate, sit down for 30 minutes, and instead of saying, oh, where's my English words, and trying to grab them from the sky, ask yourself, which ones are here? Which ones do I remember? And that is a really good guide as to where you are with English. Because if, let's say you have 10 lessons, okay? Let's say that you go to 10 classes, and in those 10 classes, you remember nothing. Nothing. You have notes in your books, but there's nothing in your head. Why is that? What happened to all that info and all that money? It's a very good question. And I know that some of you right now are going through that process. What happened? Where's my words? Or another thing is you decide to do an Udemy course or a Coursera, and within a month of doing it, you've forgotten everything, absolutely everything. Why is that? Why does that happen? Well, it's quite simple. It's because you've got all this information you've pulled in, you haven't reflected on it to see what you can use, and now you're just saying, oh, but I want more. There must be something wrong. I must have had the wrong thing. Well, you had it once. All you have to do is to look inside to find it. And you do that, as we did the last time, with a quiet meditation. Just take a big deep breath. You sit down, take a deep breath, and you see what you remember. And you need quiet for that, and you need stillness of mind. These are the things that we just don't have anymore, But if you can find that time to have a stillness of mind, to bring up what you've learned, not only bring it up, but then to take it forward and use it with confidence. That takes a special kind of a person, because you have to, first of all, remember the thing, or to take the thing from inside you, the thing that you remember from the class, find an environment where you can use it, and then see the results of that. Those three things are absolutely necessary, because you need dedication, and you also need affirmation. You need other people to celebrate with you, because language by its very default is a communication skill. It has to be shared. It's designed that way. It needs to be shared with other people, and that's something that you really need to be doing. The exact specifics of how you do that, of course, is completely up to you. But let me just summarize a few points here of what I'm saying, because I'm saying a lot, okay? What I'm saying is that when you begin to learn a language, it's not about going and pulling things from books or from people, because you're not going to remember it. The only way you will remember it is if you have time to reflect upon it, and that has to come through some kind of meditation practice. Because if you, let's say you read one page of a book today when you're alone, an hour later, if I say, what have you read? What are you going to tell me? Even if you do remember, it's going to take you probably a few minutes to try to tell me. And that shows that it's not where it should be in your mind, because it should be at the front. So you need to be using some kind of meditative practice to get yourself really into a place where you can recall the words that you've learned. You can then use them. And as I mentioned earlier, that takes dedication, and it also takes a little bit of affirmation. You have to be affirmed by other people. When you see yourself using those words, then great, that's excellent. You know, if you think of a child, what does a child know? He doesn't know anything. He's a child. He can't read or write. He can't hear anything. Well, he hears, I suppose, after he's born. But if you just think of a kid who's, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years old, he isn't able to really study yet. Study comes at school time, when he's learning to pursue whatever interest he wants. And then as a teenager, he's able to push that more into that kind of academic way that we're taught we have to be and do to make money. So think of that kid in his early years. Let's say he's maybe 2 or 3, and he's not able to read or write, so he just hears. He hears and he says, and his world is created by hearing and saying. His mind is innocent enough and he's meditative enough to remember everything because it's all he knows. Now let's fast forward by quite a number of decades there. Let's now look at someone who's in their 40s. They have, let's say, 2 kids, a cat, a wife, a job which is very demanding, and that's all in here. And at every moment there's a bit of that surfacing. And then they decide to learn English. Do they listen and repeat with the language that they're learning? Of course they don't. They say, oh, I need a book. A book is what's going to teach me, because that's how the world works. I learn something from a book because I'm a man, I'm strong, I can do that. Pay a lot of money for the book, and then what happens? You get the book, you read it. Halfway through the first page, the phone rings, it's your boss, urgent task. The book gets placed down. That happens a few times. Within a few weeks, the book's forgotten. But still, my ego tells me that I can learn. And then you try a different way. That wasn't a good book. I need a teacher. Oh, but I don't have time for a teacher. I need an online teacher. And it just goes on and on and on. And then it becomes, oh, well, I had an online teacher, but that wasn't a good one. What I need is ChatGPT. That wasn't good either. Teacher Joseph says I should meditate. So what should I do? Okay, I'll buy a relaxation tape. And it just continues. And the one thing that he never does is to stop and look inside, because that's where the answers are. If he's able to do that, then he'll be able to recall, he'll be able to have more dedication and receive that affirmation that's coming from outside as well. So really, I think the summary of this is to say that to learn a language effectively, especially if you have a very busy life, is to have some kind of meditative practice with it. It's the only way. Now, I'm not saying you have to run away to a monastery and stay there for 3 months, okay? But what I am saying is you learn, you look inside, you give, the community affirms you, okay? And that's very different from every moment. I want English, give me English. During my English classes, which I do online, many people are a little bit puzzled by my approach, because I don't begin by saying, okay, today we're going to do the present perfect. Today we're going to do the past tenses. What I say is, okay, what do you remember from our last lesson? What things? I might also begin to inquire as to what people are doing. So, what about work? You finding it stressful? How is it? And how many words did you learn last week? Yeah, you learned 20? Okay, show me. Give me 10 of them. And usually people have a book in front of them. They read the words, and I simply say, okay, put the book away. Now we'll talk. And of course, very few people can remember. Why not? It's because we're living in this world that says everything we do has to be bought. Somehow there's some transaction taking place. But actually, in using your English, you give it rather than try and take it from the teacher. That is where the learning is. So I try to get people to talk as much as they possibly can. And that's a very different thing from insisting that they sit down and read something. Talking is one of the most important things you can do when you're reading a language. When I'm doing these future clips, they will get a little bit technical, of course. I mean, you do need to have a very particular sound and a very particular accent needs to be developed based upon what you're hearing, okay? But that part is actually the easy part because all you have to do is listen and imitate and repeat, and we'll get to that. But I'm kind of starting here with a very high level of what learning looks like. And really, what it looks like is not what you think it is. Learning can be as easy or as difficult as you make it. But if you're one of these people that's going to start talking about, oh, I have no motivation. And one thing about English lessons that I'm noticing is that everybody thinks they're different. Oh, but Teacher Joseph, I'm different from everyone else. Oh, but yeah, my situation is different because I have to get up in the morning at 8. I don't get back home to 8 at night. I'm different. You'd be surprised how often I've heard that, and everyone tells me in perfect English how bad their English is, how bad their accent is, how terrible their life is, that they need something additional. If you are the kind of person that likes to learn just by taking a book and forcing it into your head by reading it again and again and again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly valid way of learning a thing. But the problem is you'll never know how powerful that thing is to use. If you go out and buy a table today, let's imagine that you didn't know what a table was, but you see it in the shop and you think, oh, yeah, everyone's talking about tables. I'll take one. And you don't read the instructions, you know nothing about it, but you take it, and then your friend comes along and he says, yeah, this is a table, and these are the things that you can do with it. And you think, oh, great, wonderful, now I have a table. All right, and you do all these kind of things. But actually, it can do more than you think it can because it's got all these hidden flaps, and it's also reversible. The top comes off it and you can turn it over, get a different surface, which has glass on it. What if you never know that? What if you don't explore it enough? For you, it's just a piece of wood with 4 legs. You don't know it's got all these hidden bits because you haven't bothered to learn. And that's a bit of a metaphor there for those people who learn only from books. You're not going to know your own power, because if you learn something by talking to someone, or if someone actually explains something to you, like the friend with the table, there's a possibility that you can see its full worth. But if you don't do it that way, then obviously you're never really going to know the value of the thing that you have. The table might not be the best example, but my point is still this, and that is when you talk to someone and you make a conscious connection with them, half an hour of doing that would be much more important than simply trying to put your head into a book to learn something like the conditional tense, it's a very different kind of experience. So I would really encourage you as much as you can to get that meditative practice going so that you can then share it with someone and they can then affirm you based upon what you remember and what you're expressing. And that doesn't involve books. It doesn't involve study. It involves being you. It involves being authentic. It involves being present. And most of all, it involves having enough time to really not study, not to look at the book, but to really find that stuff inside you instead of, looking for the next hit of English, which, even if it does come, is only going to be short term and isn't going to satisfy you. So again, the learning process that we're talking about here really is inside out, not outside in. And I think I can sum that up by talking about lack. Lack is when you feel something's missing, something's not there. And that, from what I understand, is something that you're all telling me. Oh, but I'm missing this. I don't have enough words. I don't have enough grammar. Where is it? And you're all searching. And the fact of the matter is, if you've been learning English for a few years, you do have it. It's inside you. Of course you know it. You've heard it 100 times. So does it mean it's going in here and somehow escaping? Of course not. The problem is you're too busy to actually catch it, to remember it. So you need to slow down. And hopefully 2024 will be the year that you decide to slow down a little bit. The greatest gift you can give yourself really is just to try to take up some meditative practice that's going to be slowing down your life. If you are someone, as I mentioned before, who just reads books, loves books, and learning English between lessons, between jobs at work, or if you're a teacher, between other lessons that you're giving to other people, that's never going to be a good starting point. You have to be in a position of complete and utter relaxation, calm, quiet, to hear your inner self giving you back the stuff that you've learned. And that, I think, is the most important thing that you can take away from me today. I'll be doing more clips, and I really, really need you to be thinking about how you use these. So come back and listen to this again and again. But I would be really disappointed if you don't slow down enough to learn, because even with technology coming in that's supposed to make our life easier, it isn't. It's making our life more stressful, I think, in some ways, because we're trying to compete with it. We're trying to keep up with it, and it's kind of impossible, So you can have a think about that, and we'll talk again soon. Okay, so take care and see you. Bye.